The steel came down, and the pieces that came down actually stuck into the West Side Highway and are sticking up like toothpicks.
That's the shattered skeleton of the Trade Center. But emergency room radiologists told us about the broken bodies that they saw in the first hours.
We've seen the X-rays. We've seen CAT scans and X-rays of people with crushed heads. Fortunately alive, but some pretty bad injuries.
Not even the dead are spared here. At the nearby and historic Trinity Church, graves are buried alongside the police and fire vehicles crushed under the falling towers. This is what's left of an ambulance that was among the first at the scene. There are continuing worries, of course, about the safety of the living. This response team from the EPA is testing the choking air over Manhattan. What concern is there about the air quality for the workers are?
Well, we've been asked to sample for a whole bunch of different stuff, so I don't know that there's any particular concern other than they want to know exactly what there is there, so we'll try to determine that for them.
They want to know what these guys have been breathing for the last 2 days.
Right.
Asbestos, any number of hazardous kinds of materials.
Asbestos is one of the concerns. You'll have to excuse me, I got to kind of get dressed.
It's all right, keep going. That dust has become a kind of message board. Residents who live here are sending wishes to firemen they will never meet or know. Many are leaving these notes on their way uptown, evacuating for who knows how long. Refugees in a city that they no longer recognize.
It'll never be the same. Everybody's devastated down here. It's people just walking around with like these empty looks on their faces. I feel terrible for all those people that died.
This city, so famous for toughness, at times seems a fragile place now. Elsewhere in Manhattan, former President Clinton and his daughter Chelsea came into the city to see for themselves and talk to New Yorkers. We had an opportunity to talk to them about this attack on the United States.
Thank you so much for what you're
The
doing.
former president came to the place in Manhattan where hundreds and perhaps thousands of people are standing in line waiting to fill out missing persons reports.
I just came from
Mr. Clinton spoke with many of the people as they waited in line.
Chelsea and I wanted to just go down there and encourage people, thank the workers. And I've never seen anything like it, but the people have rallied magnificently. All these people working to get their friends and neighbors out of the rubble, and I think the mayor's done a terrific job, and the governor. And New Yorkers are pulling together.
Sir, you fought terrorism all 8 years of your administration, and yet it wasn't enough. It's never enough.
We nearly, well, it'll never be enough as long as there are people out there with money and networks and who are willing to die and have a whole different view of human life and values than we do. But let me say, I believe the president and the administration will do the right thing. I think they're doing everything that can humanly be done. When they ascertain all the facts, I think they will take the appropriate action. And I believe that the magnitude of this has generated support for the United States and for taking action against these people that did not exist before. And that will open up some options for the president that would not have been there before. And I just think it's very important that the American people at this time just pull together and support and trust them all to do the right thing.
What's the message?
The message is that this is an act which was both evil and which denies our common humanity. And what we Americans have to do, what New Yorkers have to do, is to prove them wrong. You just walk up and down the street here. We got people here from everywhere, people of all different faiths. The American people know this is not something done by all Muslims, that America is full of Muslims who deplore this sort of behavior and who are just as offended, if not more offended, than the rest of us are. And we just need to take care of the victims and the families of those who have died, and the children who will need to be educated. We need to rebuild New York, and we need to support the president and the administration in answering this challenge. But they will do it. We will do it as a people. I have no doubt of it.
The president's daughter, Chelsea Clinton, was in Lower Manhattan at the time of the attack.
I was about 12 blocks from here.
You were 12 blocks from here?
South.
What did you see?
Smoke, people running, crying, just what we've all seen replayed on the television. It was horrifying, of course.
And what do you make of this?
I don't think there's anything to make of it. It's just a tragedy.
All over Lower Manhattan, the cleanup is already well underway. We saw people today with hoses spraying down sidewalks, shattered cars being towed away, and structural engineers looking at buildings to see if they will be safe to reoccupy. The financial district is getting ready to get down to business, even though the hard work of search and rescue will continue for some time to come. Scott Pelley, CBS News, New York.
President Bush and those around him made it clear that they're planning for a sustained retaliation against terrorism. And their plans, it is now clear, include call-ups of reserve troops. We get an update on this from David Martin at the Pentagon.
The U.S. is planning an all-out war not just against Osama bin Laden for having directed these attacks, but against all terrorist organizations that threaten American interests. It will be a war like no other.
The kind of organizations that conduct these terrorist activities make for difficult targets. It is not as if you are going after an army in the field or you're trying to destroy cities or fixed installations.
Attacking bin Laden's camps in Afghanistan, as the U.S. did 3 years ago, is not going to put him out of business.
They're also a thinking enemy. They know what they've done, they know when they're going to do it, and they know what consequences might be coming back in their direction. So you have to consider you're dealing with a very, very skilled, knowledgeable, thinking enemy.
U.S. officials say they are drafting plans to attack not just bin Laden, but the Taliban rulers of Afghanistan who allow him to operate from their territory. By threatening the Taliban with destruction, the U.S. hopes to force them to turn bin Laden over. And it's not just bin Laden the U.S. is after.
When we're through with that network, we will continue with a global assault against terrorism in general.
A senior official named the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah, which in 1983 killed more than 200 American Marines in Beirut, and Hamas, which sends suicide bombers against Israeli civilians, as two of the terrorist groups the U.S. intends to go after. And the Deputy Secretary of Defense explained what it will take to win.
You do it with the full resources of the U.S. government. It will be a campaign, not a single action. And we're going to keep after these people and the people who support them until this stops.
The U.S. has launched cruise missiles and arrested bin Laden's accomplices, but that hasn't stopped the terrorists.
One of the things these guys have demonstrated is that as hard as we look, they can hide some things from us, and that's why we're going to try to deny them the sanctuaries and the places from which they do hide things.
Bodies pulled from the Pentagon arrived at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware for identification, as the Defense Department estimated the total number of dead at 190, 126 people in the building, and 64 more aboard the plane. Fear of a further collapse is making the task of recovering the bodies agonizingly slow.
We would all like it to go very quickly, but in doing things quickly, you have a very unstable building, and it's almost at a crawling pace.
It also slows the hunt for the plane's cockpit voice recorder, which could answer so many questions about the final moments.
They thought they knew where it was, that it is, we are close to it, but close doesn't mean a short period of time.
There is no real hope of survivors, but one find did raise spirits. The Marine Corps colors still standing amid the wreckage.
Everyone was pretty, for the past 2 days, surprised that, we had a set of Marine Corps colors intact. And so that was pretty symbolic of, why we're all here.
One other indication of what this war will cost, the Pentagon is asking the president for authority to call up 30 to 50,000 reservists. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Now about the criminal investigation. Federal investigators have now ID'd all of the hijackers who died in the plane crashes, and they say they have pictures of them. Jim Stewart in Washington has the latest on this.
Police searched a house in Vienna, Virginia, where the terrorist hijackers who flew into the Pentagon might have stayed before the attack. It's unclear what they found. And in New York, one man is in custody and others are being questioned after a scare over fake identities that led the FAA to shut down all 3 New York airports. Meanwhile, the easiest part of this investigation may be over. Authorities are poised to release the names and photographs of the estimated 18 hijackers, but federal investigators are still not certain they have accounted for all the terrorist pilots. The terrorists who seized controls of the planes all attended aviation school in the United States, some as recently as a year ago, and FBI agents were busy today searching the former apartment of 2 of the suspects who were at the controls during the World Trade Center attacks. Using airport surveillance video, credit card receipts, and the passenger list, the FBI believes it has identified all the hijackers on the 4 flights.
Unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate, 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
What is not as clear, however, is whether the dead hijackers left behind some live colleagues who may have attended the same aviation classes. Sources say the flight school records are being closely examined.
We are continuing to develop an understanding of all the associates that these individuals had.
In other developments, sources say there is no evidence thus far that any other nation was involved in the attack. Some of the hijackers had lived in the U.S. for more than a year, say sources, and others were associated with the Islamic fundamentalist group believed to be responsible for attacking the USS Cole. Meanwhile, the collection of physical evidence continued, with agents recovering what reads like a suicide note from the rental car of one suspect, while in Hamburg, Germany, police raided an apartment there based on an FBI request. There were also some dramatic arrests like these at Newark International Airport, where 4 people were taken off a Saudi Arabian airliner, but it remains unclear whether they were associated with Tuesday's attacks. What is also not clear is just how much help the actual hijackers had, although agents assume it was a sizable network both here and abroad.
The number of associates is significant, but I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to try and attach a specific number.
Federal authorities are expected to show America the face of the men who carried out these attacks. Agents are busily assembling photographs of all 18 hijackers, complete with their names and nationalities. They are expected to be released sometime Friday. Jim Stewart, CBS News, Washington.
Joining us now live from Washington is Dr. Robert Satloff. He is Executive Director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which, among other things, I understand it, Doctor, is to promote informed debate on U.S. policy in and around the Middle East. Hard to have an informed debate unless you have an informed public. So I want to ask for some perspective on what's sometimes called the Muslim world. About how many Muslims are there worldwide?
There's more than 1 billion.
And about how many of those are of Arab heritage?
Well, the Arab world is only a reasonably small piece of the overall Muslim world. About 1/3 of the Muslim world is Arab. The vast majority of Muslims live elsewhere, in Asia, in Indonesia, Malaysia. India is the most populous Muslim country in the world, with 300 million Muslims, almost equal to all the Muslims in the Arab world itself.
I think most people would think, well, no, India is, Hindu for the most part, or Buddhist.
That's right. Well, India is indeed mostly Hindu, but India is so big that its minority Muslims are still larger than any other Muslim majority country in the world.
What portion, if that's the right word, of the so-called Muslim world views the United States with hatred?
I believe it's exceedingly small. I think it's both more fringe and less fringe than we believe. It's exceedingly small in numerical terms. I mean, of the 1 billion+ Muslims, we're talking a percentage that doesn't register on the scale. But yet, it is still very large when you think of the numbers that it takes to create any sort of terrorist network. There are many in the Muslim world, the vast majority, who abhor what happened 2 days ago. There is a minority, a disturbingly large minority, who believe that suicide bombings are legitimate. And really, that's the target that needs to be focused on for any civilizational, cultural effort that the United States and the West needs to target.
All right. You said what you call a fairly large minority of Muslims on a worldwide basis may indeed view this country as, if not hating it, viewing it with disgust and disdain. Now, put that together with the information that Osama bin Laden has network cells of one description or another, or at least contacts in at least 55 countries around the world. Question, is it realistic to say, well, we're going to launch a war that will stamp out not only bin Laden's form of terrorism, but terrorism wherever it may be?
Well, I think we need to use two paradigms. One is the paradigm of war, and the other is the paradigm of disease. War you can win. Disease takes time and effort. You need to isolate and seek antidotes, and only over a long period of time with a multi-pronged effort can you stamp it out. You can get bin Laden, and you may be able to get Hezbollah, and maybe get Hamas, but it will take us a long time to stamp out the scourge in general.
Doctor, thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Earlier today, the flight data recorder was found from United Flight 93. That's the plane which crashed Earth Tuesday morning in southwest Pennsylvania, about 80 miles from Pittsburgh. Bob Orr has that story and more from Washington.
Dan, the flight data recorder is key. It could provide investigators with important information on how the United 757 was being flown in its last moments. But investigators tell us they also need the cockpit voice recorder. That's the second black box, to really understand what was going on board the doomed jetliner. That, investigators hope, will have recorded the conversations as the hijackers tried to steer the plane to Washington, and as it turns out, towards a very high-profile target.
Tuesday's attack ended in rural Pennsylvania when the last of the 4 hijacked jetliners, United Airlines Flight 93, nosedived into the ground. But sources say as the wave of terrorism unfolded, it was that plane the Secret Service feared most after a telephone threat made it clear the target was Air Force One. When United Flight 93 took off from Newark at 8:43, Air Force One was parked in Sarasota waiting to take the president home from an education event. No one believes the hijackers ever intended to attack the president's plane in midair. But in just over an hour, both jets would be heading towards Andrews Air Force Base. At 9:35, United 93 veered from its planned flight route and headed back towards Washington. With the World Trade Center towers already on fire, the jet's erratic movements were enough to convince controllers that this plane, too, had been hijacked. Just 3 minutes later, at 9:38, American Airlines Flight 77 plowed into the Pentagon. The first hit in what authorities now believe was to be a double-barreled attack on Washington. Within minutes, at around 9:45, orders were given to evacuate the White House. On board Flight 93, a number of passengers, learning of the New York attacks and cell phone calls with families, decided to take back the plane.
On the last phone call, he said that a group of them were getting ready to do something. And then he hung up and he never called back.
In Florida, the president was told of the terrorism and cut short his visit. At 9:54, Air Force One took off for Washington. Flight 93, meanwhile, continued flying east into western Pennsylvania. And at 10:03, someone in the cockpit deliberately turned off critical radar information, leaving controllers in the dark about the movements of a jet that was now a flying bomb on a course for the nation's capital. Along Florida's Atlantic coast, Air Force One continued to fly north. But suddenly at 10:14, the president's plane turned to the west. About 6 minutes later, the fight for control on board Flight 93 ended as the 757 with 45 people on board crashed in an unpopulated field. Air Force One, now out of danger, continued on, landing at Louisiana's Barksdale Air Force Base at 11:45. Today, the president defended the decision to divert Air Force One.
I know I took the appropriate actions as the commander-in-chief to be in a position to be able to make the decisions necessary for our government to handle the crisis.
There is also new information about the other hijacked jetliner that did hit the Pentagon. Republican Congressman John Mica, the chairman of the House Aviation Subcommittee, says he's been told that plane may have flown over the White House and maybe encircled the Capitol building before hitting the military headquarters. Mica called it, quote, sheer in-your-face terrorism. Dan?
Bob Orr, live in Washington. Some new information is coming in about what happened around New York's JFK airport today. We're going to pass that along to you in just a moment. But first, let's go to the White House and get caught up on the story there. Among other things, security being beefed up, including a move for the vice president, at least temporarily. CBS News chief White House correspondent John Roberts reports what's behind that.
Dan, as a result of an avalanche of intelligence coming in from around the world, the White House undertook new security precautions today. Shortly after noon, the president and the vice president were separated. Dick Cheney is now at Camp David, where he will remain until at least the weekend. At the same time, the Secret Service locked down a 6-block area around the White House. Also tonight, for the first time, we heard an assessment from the administration of just what sort of time frame they are projecting it will take to deal with a crisis the likes of which no president has seen before.
The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration. But now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory.
From the Oval Office today, echoed in the scarred canyons of New York, the drumbeat of war spread across the nation and around the globe. In Congress, President Bush sought authority to commit the American military into harm's way. And he is working the phones, as his father did 11 years ago in the Gulf War, to build a global coalition against the terrorists who shattered buildings and stole lives.
We have just seen the first war of the 21st century, and there's universal approval of the statements I have made, and I am confident there will be universal approval of the actions this government takes.
Administration officials today sent word to America that they will proceed slowly, that this is a long struggle that will be measured not in days, but weeks and months, perhaps years.
I think it's one of the most complex problems that an American leader has had to face probably since the Civil War.
Historian Stephen Hess says that the task ahead for George Bush defies the sort of conventional response that rose out of the last great attack against American soil, Pearl Harbor.
You had a nation united to a common known enemy, able to fight a war. We know how to fight wars. But what do we do in this very special situation where we have to somehow uproot a terrorist organization, stop them from doing these sorts of things before they kill again?
Already there is a heightened state of alert against those who may kill again. The president's motorcade route to a Washington hospital was today lined by police with automatic weapons. The security cordon around the White House again pushed back. Pennsylvania Avenue now off limits to anyone without a government pass. All of this, says Stephen Hess, will have a lasting effect on how America looks at itself.
For the first time in our lives, we feel that we can be threatened in our homes. We can be threatened in the skies overhead. They have reached us. They have reached into Fortress America. And suddenly we have been pierced. And I think that's a profound change in how America is going to look upon the future.
How the president responds to this crisis, the degree of confidence he can restore in a nation shattered, will shape his presidency. There is little argument. This is a defining moment.
This is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy.
White House officials said tonight that the request from the Pentagon to call up the reserves is under active consideration, though they add if the president grants the request, it would be a limited call-up and only for specific reasons that they refuse to go into. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. New York airports having been opened early in the day, then were closed rather suddenly. LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark later in the day. Among the things that happened is a man who tried to use a fake pilot's identification to get past security at John F. Kennedy International Airport was arrested. 5 other people were detained. We understand some of those people were detained because they did not pass the test of the Immigration Service. So those are among the reasons that the New York airport suddenly closed again. The expectation is they'll be open again tomorrow, but that's not yet assured. Now let's take you again to downtown Manhattan, where under the lights, as we pass the midnight hour in the east, the hard work goes on. Early in the day, 2 firefighters were found alive in the debris, and there was some joy at what was seen as a miracle in the madness. Turned out they were 2 firefighters who had not been down there, had not been trapped the whole time, but they'd been trapped for part of the day. But it was one of the day's bright spots. CBS News continuing coverage of the attack on America will continue. This is CBS's continuing coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather with Anthony Mason at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. At this hour, here are some of the major headlines as the search goes through another night in the shattered World Trade Center here in New York City and at the Defense Department, the Pentagon in Washington. The confirmed death toll is now nearing 500. It's feared the final count could top 5,000. The flight data recorder from one of the 4 jets hijacked Tuesday has been recovered, and searchers at the Pentagon are working their way toward another flight data recorder. Investigators say they have identified the hijackers in the sky and have pictures of all of them. They're not sure everybody else involved has yet been identified. The Pentagon says it's planning sustained military action against terrorists and those who support them. Defense officials want to call up as many as 50,000 reserve troops to active duty. And President Bush declared the U.S. will lead the world to victory over terrorism in what he called the First World War of the 21st century. The past 48 hours have brought much more than enough sorrow and worry for the whole country to bear. Russ Mitchell has the story of one place that's dealing with far more than its fair share.
They began lining up early, armed with pictures, medical records, and lots of hope.
We're not going to give up. We know she's on the list, so
I see somebody that looks like her.
We're keeping our faith. And Jennifer Loves, we were all waiting for you.
After standing in line for hours, they were interviewed in private by New York police detectives and counselors. Many left photos of their loved ones on telephone poles and mailboxes, hoping someone would see them and call.
Last night, I couldn't sleep. I had to go break in his apartment and get the phone number, call all his family from here to Africa, and everybody been calling me all night last night.
If anyone has any idea if they've seen him or knows where he is, to call us. He's got 2 little babies. 2 little babies.
And there would be more agony. Once inside, friends and family were shown by city officials a list of some 2,000 names of those either in area hospitals or seen at some point by doctors.
If you haven't seen your family member on that list, it could still mean they don't know where he is.
Julia Borishevsky's brother was not on the list. She says the past 48 hours have been unbearable.
This is it's just been so unbelievable. It's like surreal. It's not happening. It's just the worst nightmare in hell. We don't know like what day it is or where we are. The words can't just describe it. Words cannot describe it.
Not only has the World Trade Center disaster forever changed the landscape of New York City, it has also left an indelible mark on one small upstate New York village. Jim Axelrod is there.
At the Candlelight Flower Shop in Washingtonville, New York.
And you want yellow streamers?
They're going nonstop.
We know what it's like to be busy, but this is a different kind of busy. This is breaking your heart kind of busy.
60 miles north of New York City. Norma Esposito's been filling orders for the families of New York's bravest, like the one a brave young boy made for his mom.
And I said to him, so what makes you so brave? His father is one of the firefighters missing. We have a prayer list in our store. I took the prayer list down. I wrote Robert Hamilton's name on it. And I told the young child, yes, you are very brave.
Washingtonville is a place where New York firefighters and police started to move a decade ago. A small town where the long commute means a nicer house and fewer hassles. A place where dreams now have turned to dread, as some are still missing in the rubble of Lower Manhattan.
The direct connection is there, and we're all trying to deal with that as best we can.
Police Chief Steve Pascal doesn't know yet how many, but the feeling is growing. Tragedy may well stick to Washingtonville, like so many decals here on the car's rear windows.
It's a terrible feeling, but you know eventually it's going to come. It's inevitable for the amount of people that live here, that work there. And when it does, and if it does, we're here for them.
With at least 125 New York City firefighters living in this small village, dozens of city cops, EMS personnel, corrections officers,
The locals jokingly refer to Washingtonville as a civil service ghetto. Even the part-time mayor here is a full-time New York City firefighter.
What do you think the toll is going to be here?
The toll is going to be devastating.
Mayor Lenny Curcio is also Lieutenant Curcio. He's just back from a 48-hour shift working the disaster.
2 days later, how many people do you know that you've lost?
I've lost at least 12 to 15 people I personally know.
My brother's a New York City fireman.
Brian Zaccaro's connection is even closer. His brother Anthony works out of a firehouse in Brooklyn.
As of right now, his whole fire company's still missing, his ladder company. Nobody's accounted for.
But Brian and Washingtonville have dodged at least one bullet.
Your brother's entire ladder company is unaccounted for?
Yes.
And why wasn't he there?
It was his day off.
Just a fluke.
But no one thinks they'll dodge them all.
Safe to say, some folks are not coming home.
Yes. And I hope it's different for Washingtonville. I hope it's different for everywhere, but it's reality.
Which is why their hands will stay busy for a while longer at the flower shop. Busy hands and breaking hearts.
That's good.
Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Washingtonville, New York.
Grounded air travelers got some hopeful news when the government finally officially lifted the ban on commercial aviation, but it's going to be slow going for a while, or maybe more. CBS News correspondent Sandra Hughes reports from Los Angeles International Airport.
Even as the first commercial flight descended into Newark, there was no avoiding the sight of what created the worst transportation crisis in American history. Things slowly struggled back to normal, but everything had changed. At Los Angeles International Airport, people had to board buses at a remote parking lot to be transported to the airport. But even that wasn't safe.
They herded us back 500 feet from the bus and said there was a bomb on it. And I thought twice. If I get on the plane. But then they cut the yellow tape and said, if you can run to the terminal, you can fly today. And it was just massive people running.
There were thoughts of home and other thoughts.
I can't find my sister, so I'm trying to see if I can reach her. Lines have been busy. I can't reach her by the phone, and she works at the World Trade Center, so I don't know yet. So that's one of the reasons I'm anxious to get home.
By midday, the inside of some terminals were beyond chaotic.
Make sure that you have names on all bags.
As passengers tried to rebook canceled flights.
I said we were not leaving without you.
It wasn't just passengers who were edgy. One small plane landed without permission today in Mobile, Alabama. The airport was evacuated as a precaution. There was also an evacuation at Orlando's International Airport when a mysterious package was found. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta vowed that all these inconveniences won't crush Americans' independence.
We will not allow this enemy to win the war by restricting our freedom of mobility.
But make no mistake, travel will not be easy.
Please empty everything out of your pockets, put it in a basket, and hand it to the person at the metal detector. That means everything.
Time and patience will be necessary.
For the time being, we are suggesting arriving at the airport at least 2 to 2.5 hours for domestic flights and 3 to 3.5 hours before international flights.
From this day forward, we are operating with tightened security. In the weeks and months ahead, we will do all that we can to ensure that the safety of the American aviation system is in place.
And despite unprecedented security measures, there is no guarantee.
There has to be some reckoning with reality here, too. I mean, take away everything from everybody and strip them naked, and they still have fingers they can do something with. We have to look at this from a very realistic standpoint.
But the American spirit is still alive and well, as evidenced by the impromptu salute near a runway by America West employees. Airport officials here in Los Angeles say they and the nation's other airports will be up to about 50% capacity by this weekend, possibly full capacity by the end of next week. But air travel will likely never be what it was before. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Los Angeles.
If you travel by air or you plan to travel by air anytime in the future, this you must know. Airport security is undergoing drastic changes. It has a whole new look, a whole new attitude. And authorities say We want to underscore this. For domestic flights for the time being, you should get to the airport 2.5 hours ahead of time. For international flights, get there 3.5 hours ahead of time. I know you're saying, it's a lot of time. That's the way it's going to be, folks, for at least a while. Peter Van Sant has more on this story.
How many people going out? One person? Okay, there's no curbside check-in anymore. You have to go inside to check in.
Please empty everything out of your pockets. Keys, change, cell phones, pagers, pens.
After closing the skies for more than 2 days, the government today allowed limited airline flights to resume amid the tightest security in U.S. history.
Anybody who would say they're comfortable is a nut.
I'm leery, but I really want to get home.
But getting anywhere in America is going to take time and a lot of patience.
Can I just sit this one on the floor behind me?
In Seattle, Delta Airlines employees began random searches of individual suitcases. This is just one of a series of new security measures, which include a ban on carry-on knives, no matter how small, no curbside checking of bags, boarding areas restricted to ticketed passengers, and a thorough search of planes before anyone gets on board.
We have taken every precaution to make sure that it is safe to fly in America. There's increased presence on the airplanes. Yes, I would, if a family member asked whether they should fly, I'd say yes.
And the person sitting next to you may soon be a sky marshal. Armed, plainclothes officers will be boarding many flights. And there's even more security. Sources tell CBS News that more than 800 federal agents are patrolling 17 airports around the country.
I'm all in favor of it. Beef it up, search my bags, search me, search everybody.
Is this a new day? It is definitely a new day.
Barry Schiff is an aviation safety consultant who was a captain with TWA for 34 years. We brought him to a mock-up of a modern Boeing cockpit.
Do you support placing air marshals on airplanes today? I absolutely support air marshals. To have plainclothes personnel on board an airplane is going to be intimidating to anyone who thinks he's going to be able to hijack an airplane.
But the last time air marshals rode into the skies, back in the 1970s, there were concerns.
Well, I found that it's a fairly boring job for them. And they get a little frustrated, a little impatient. They wanted something to happen. I had the feeling that they had itchy trigger fingers, and perhaps they could at times create more of a hazard than they were worth.
Schiff believes one way to prevent future hijackings is to turn the cockpit door into a bulletproof, knockdown-proof barrier.
I think we're going to have to isolate the cockpit from the cabin, if that's at all possible. After all, cockpit doors are not like bank vaults. You can crash them down if necessary.
It's clear with the new threat, we need stronger doors. We need
Captain Dwayne Worth is president of the Airline Pilots Association, representing thousands of pilots.
We need bolts on the doors, be able to control access to the cockpit more securely, because some of those doors are simply too flimsy.
Protecting the door is critical because once inside the cockpit, there is little a pilot can do.
Why wouldn't the pilot have, the expression is float these guys, put the plane into a dive where there's zero gravity on board and these guys are floating up on the ceiling, ask the passengers then to help subdue these guys? Well, they could do that, but then you tend to agitate the hijackers, and they could do things you don't ordinarily want them to do. You don't have any idea as a pilot that they're going to use your airplane as a guided missile.
On the ground, safety experts say the U.S. must immediately retrain and hire new screeners at airport security checkpoints.
We're going to need to pay more to attract the highest caliber people possible.
They're minimum wage personnel given minimal training. In many cases, they're criminals themselves. Not all, of course, but some. I participated in a test some years ago and was able to bring on board a .45 caliber gun.
Schiff believes, and this is hard to hear, that no matter what we do, there are no guarantees that a determined terrorist will always be stopped.
So we will never really be 100% safe. There's no such thing as perfection.
The Airline Pilots Association would like to see the federal government take over airport security to ensure that personnel are properly trained and, if need be, properly armed. Peter Van Sant, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And speaking about airplane and airport security, one interesting story after another is coming to light now as the days go by about events surrounding Tuesday. And Anthony Mason, you have a very good example of this in a story that came to light today.
Yeah, the Associated Press, Dan, is reporting, citing a law enforcement source, that the FBI is investigating whether an altercation which occurred at Kennedy Airport on Tuesday may in fact have been another aborted hijacking attempt. Now, this Tuesday incident occurred about 9 a.m., which was the same time, of course, the two planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers. Apparently, a United Airlines plane, Flight 23 bound for Los Angeles, was boarded. Passengers on board were told they were not going to take off. And 3 males traveling on this plane refused to disembark. The Associated Press says the argument with a member of the flight crew became so heated, the crew member called airport security. But by the time security got there, the 3 men had vanished. As I say, the FBI is reportedly now investigating this whole incident, which occurred at Kennedy Airport roughly at the same time as the other 2 attacks, and whether this, in fact, may have been a hijacking as well.
Well, Attorney General Ashcroft said today the FBI has more than 1,000 leads. Who knows, this may be one of them. Although my sense was he was talking more about leads of people who said, you know, I really know something that you need to know. I thought it was especially interesting, Anthony, that the Attorney General, he wouldn't give a number of the people who might still be at large, that is, people who didn't get aboard the hijacked planes, but in some ways were part of the conspiracy. And it's a hunch, and you say, well, don't report your hunches, but when security got heightened around the White House today and when some airports were shut back down, you had to think that part of that was because they were still hoping to catch some of those people still at large.
Well, it's very clear. I mean, in the city today, in New York City, in Staten Island, which is, of course, one of the boroughs and is, in fact, an island, they virtually sealed off Staten Island for a period of half an hour to 45 minutes today, trying to find a car and somebody in it who they'd been chasing. I mean, there are clearly little pockets of people they are looking for around the country, and periodically they seem to zone in on them, and you get these clampdowns.
Well, I thought former New York Police Commissioner Kelly made an interesting point today. You know, he had charge of not only the Secret Service, but the Immigration Service, Border Patrol, and that sort of thing. He said, listen, for years, everybody in the federal government has known that we need to tighten up on such things as the immigration and customs, because they check people's visas and whether people really are entitled to come into the country. This comes to mind because the indications are that some of these people involved in crashing some of these aircraft had deep ties to radical movements in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and some of them may very well have been operating on, false papers, as it were.
Well, I think one of the questions that ultimately will be asked is were authorities aware of the identity of these men to start with? Had they been identified in some fashion? And if so, why didn't they know more about what they were up to?
And we haven't even touched on the subject in the course of this conversation about the abject failure of U.S. intelligence, a $25 billion a year budget, to even get a hint of this coming. All of that in the mix, and there'll be a lot of talk about it as the weeks and months go by. At the Manhattan disaster site, searchers in the untold tons of debris are themselves in mortal danger at every turn. There's mortal danger all over that scene in Lower Manhattan. Lee Cowan is there.
At least half a dozen buildings around the site are as shaky as the nerves of the rescuers working near them, and with good reason. This is the lobby of what used to be one of New York's finer hotels. In an instant, the ground floor became ground zero as the South Tower collapsed right across the street. From behind the reservation desk, computers still glow. Around the corner, elevators sound a faint alarm, just like the one at the security desk. Its urgency a flashing understatement. There are a host of eerie scenes in the wake of this disaster, but perhaps no place really describes how sudden it all happened than here. This is the restaurant in the Hilton Millennium Hotel at the World Trade Center. At the time of the blast, it was breakfast time. Coffee cups still filled with coffee, breakfast plates now covered in dust. Still hanging on the walls, a reminder of what used to be, while out the next window, the reality of what is now. After 3 buildings collapsed during the first day,
Today, new signs that other buildings are beginning to fail as well.
I just worked the night shift overnight, and they pulled us out because the fire department said it was structurally unsafe.
Throughout the day and night, volunteers like Don Boyd were evacuated from the site for fear searching through the rubble might bring down some more. And at every turn, the ghosts of those who were here still remain.
They were going about their business, and the next thing you know, their lives changed forever.
This home video taken by Boyd shows what was left behind by those who fled this nearby atrium. Scattered on the floor, the remnants of a morning that started like any other.
And there were menus blown out into the area. There was people's identification. There were books. There were pictures. I mean, these are lives. I mean, they represent lives all over.
Just to the left of that gaping hole in the building's side is one of many makeshift morgues.
I mean, a police officer that I was talking to he was bagging and tagging fingers and hands, just taking fingerprints. Is this one person? Is this two people? I mean, is this three people? And I mean, the guy's like, these are our own, man. I mean, you know, what are we going to do?
In so many places tonight, it's up to the firefighters alone to comb through the wreckage, while the helping hands of volunteers remain idle, waiting for the all clear to return.
You want to go back in? Yeah, I mean, I'm here. If they call me right now, I could do another shift, without a doubt.
And call they did. Working on no sleep and a lot of faith, Boyd joined up with another group of strangers to head back into hell.
Lee Cowan. Joining us now live in our broadcast is Dr. Alan Schneider, Director of Psychiatry at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles and an expert in post-traumatic stress. Dr. Schneider, what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome?
Well, first of all, Dan, to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, we have to look at what causes it, and it's usually an exposure to an intense kind of trauma as existed in the events of Tuesday, watching the building collapse, being in the building as it collapsed. And then after that, about 50% of the people who are exposed to that kind of an event, whether it's the people who survived it or the rescue workers who went there, would experience such things as intrusive recollections of the event, nightmares, flashbacks, difficulty with concentration, problems with sleep, and a kind of numbing where they would withdraw from friends and families, very similar to what one sees in depression.
By the way, Doctor, I know that it used to be called post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's now called post-traumatic stress disorder. Before that was called battle fatigue. Before that was called shell shock. But post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, who are the people that are primarily at risk with this?
Well, we think that there's a dose-response effect, meaning that the people who are exposed to the highest doses of trauma would be those that would be at the greatest risk. That would be the rescue workers, the police and fire personnel, individuals who are standing at the scene. But this is a very unprecedented event in the sense that so many Americans witness this on TV live that it may affect thousands or hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Are you suggesting or not that you could get post-traumatic stress disorder from watching television, a heavy dose of watching the events live on television?
Yes, in fact, we know that exposure to these events via the television could, in fact, cause post-traumatic stress disorder.
Doctor, I recognize this is not your area of expertise, but I want to call on your general knowledge. What do we tell the children? I mean, can children have post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, children do develop acute stress reactions, and it depends, of course, on the age of the child. Children from 0 to 3 might show things such as confusion, difficulty with sleep, separation anxiety from their parents. They may have regressive behaviors. They may start to bedwet or suck their thumbs, whereas they had normally not done that. As children age, the reaction differs. In school-age children, it might be a sense of anxiety about separation. It might be behavioral problems, conduct problems. And then finally, in teenagers, they may show reactions very similar to what adults see, or they may actually have risk-taking behavior as a consequence of this. And what we tell them really depends on their age. I think the thing that we need to instill in the children is that events like this do occur, but that we're in the process of rebuilding and that we're trying to ensure safety.
Now, for children who rank-and-file families far removed from the worst of the disaster, I come back to just if you have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, what does a parent, what does anybody tell the child when the child has questions about such a horrific event?
I think the most important thing is honesty at a child's level, that they can understand that bad things do occur, that we certainly have very strong feelings about this, but to reiterate to them that we're in the process of rebuilding, reconstructing, and that we're trying to ensure safety.
Has there ever been an event, well, let's say in the last century in the United States, in which so many people will be at risk of post-traumatic stress disorder?
No, I really don't think so, because unlike the events such as the Coconut Grove fire, the attack on Pearl Harbor, people really were not able to witness that so directly as we were on TV the other day. And so many children who saw this, I think that it's going to really raise the number of people who will develop acute stress reactions, which will hopefully resolve quickly, but then some of them will go on to more chronic post-traumatic stress disorder.
And if you have someone in the family, an adult, that you think is becoming a victim of post-traumatic stress disorder, how can you help?
Well, first, I think it's important to get people to ventilate, to speak about their feelings, and this can be done really on the family level. If it appears that somebody's going on to develop more acute symptoms such as difficulty with sleep, irritability, concentration problems, or in more severe cases, flashbacks, then they really need to seek professional help as quickly as possible.
Anthony Mason has a question.
Dr. Schneider, you described some very visible signs, but I imagine with a lot of children in particular, you're not going to see visible signs, yet they're obviously going to be upset by something like this. How do you detect something like that, and how do you react to it?
Basically, you look for changes in behavior patterns in children. For example, children might become more clingy than usual with their parents, afraid to go to school. My daughter in particular spoke that morning about what would happen if her building fell in, and that requires a degree of reassurance that they're okay, that we won't allow these things to happen to them.
Dr. Alan Schneider, thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
You may have noticed since the attack against the USA that there has been an explosion of red, white, and blue. American flags are popping up everywhere. Maureen Maher reports on a country showing her true colors.
Across the nation, flags have been flying off the shelves.
I've probably gone to 8 or 9 places. There are no flags.
Walmart sold 200,000 yesterday and put more on order today.
This is probably the most direct way for the common citizen to go show his support.
I knew some people on those planes, and I feel like I have to do something.
Ever since the disaster, a wave of patriotism has been spreading across America.
America is united. We are strong. We are stronger than ever.
From blood drives to passing out freedom ribbons.
If it's anything red, white, and blue, it's going to sell.
At times like this, it's what we do in America. We, the people, pull together, and united we stand.
We cease to be New Yorkers and Texans and become Americans really, really quick when the need is there.
The first question comes up.
At this New Orleans Army recruiting office and others, the young and the brave are preparing to defend the land of the free.
I have confidence that our government will take the necessary action to see that justice is done.
You want to be a part of that?
Yes, sir.
This country has to take care of itself. Nobody else is going to.
That attitude has helped to more than double sales at B&S Guns and other shops since Tuesday's attack.
This gun has no safety at all.
Why are people coming in, do you think?
The first day they were buying ammunition, and now they're beginning to buy defense guns of their own. They don't know how far this goes.
For this man, it only goes as far as trying to vent his frustration out at a paper target.
I've been antsy. I've run every emotion there is since Tuesday, and I thought, well, this is something I can do that's harmless.
Across the country, from dusk to dawn, young and old, the emotions have run the gamut.
These terrorists did what no politician, no speaker, nothing else, no one else could do, and that is bring Americans together.
But the sentiment and the symbol are the same. Maureen Maher, CBS News, Dallas.
And now we pause for another moment from this attack on America.
We have gathered here today as communities of faith to unite our prayers, our hopes, our support, to express our grief, to remember all the victims of these attacks, and to pray for the ongoing rescue efforts. May our unity in heart and prayer be a beacon of light in a darkened world.
Oh, beautiful, oh, spacious
This is continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. We pick up our coverage now, CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather with Anthony Mason at CBS News World Headquarters in New York. At this hour, 12:30 in the Eastern Time Zone, these are among the more important headlines. The FBI is now holding a man who allegedly tried to use a fake pilot's ID and a ticket for a Tuesday flight to board a jetliner Thursday at New York's just reopened Kennedy Airport. After the arrest, JFK and the other 2 New York airports were shut down again. Weary search crews carry on for a 3rd straight night in the shattered remains of the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon. The flight data recorder was recovered from the hijacked jet that crashed in Pennsylvania. Searchers are tracking a signal being sent out of another flight data recorder at the Pentagon. The nation's airlines are slowly, very slowly, returning to service, but the number of flights is still far below normal. Defense officials are asking President Bush to authorize calling up 30 to 50,000 military reservists. The president will visit New York on Friday on what he calls a national day of prayer and remembrance. At the World Trade Center disaster site, rescue teams work through the night, still looking for victims. The belief runs strong that some people are still alive in the debris. CBS's Byron Pitts reports from the scene.
This is Ground Zero. What you're watching is a videotape shot by a fireman. TV cameras were not allowed this close to the scene, but I managed to make my way in.
You can begin to hear, Dan, hopefully those will fall.
At that moment, I was reporting by cell phone the successful rescue of one firefighter. Pulled to safety, then walked through a gauntlet of applause as grown men cried.
They're shaking his hand. I believe the man himself is crying. Right now, they're trying to get a medic to him. He says he's okay. He's telling everyone he's okay.
It was one of those moments these rescue workers live for. For nearly 48 hours, men and women, cops, construction workers, and firefighters have scratched and pulled and cut their way through a mountain of rubble that was once the World Trade Center. 1,600 volunteers called in. Thousands more just showed up.
Hey, we need buckets and a couple guys! Buckets!
In the midst of it all, reminders of reality. Inside that orange body bag, one of too many victims. Today, for the first time, rescue teams reached the bottom of Tower 1. These are the first images out, taken by a rescue worker, of the dark and deadly corners that must be searched. Surreal, quiet images, stillness that often ends suddenly.
Excuse me, sir, have you heard what happened?
Twice today, rescue workers were ordered to run when it was feared another building was about to collapse. Besides the 2 World Trade Center towers, at least 4 other buildings have fallen, and portions of at least 8 others may go next.
We have 4,763 people on the missing persons list.
Today, the mayor of New York City and the governor of New York State took a call from the president.
We will be with you when the United States takes firm and appropriate action to those who conducted this evil.
Aid by the truckload is still pouring into New York City, but anguish is never far behind. That fire department chaplain who died Tuesday was killed as he gave last rites to a firefighter laying at his feet.
Yeah, this is what Michael Judge was all about. He said, Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say, and keep me out of your way. That was Michael Judge. He had 6 times.
Now we go to Harold Dow. He has some of the remarkable accounts of those who know that they've cheated death.
People come from all over the world just to go see those towers.
It showed New York as a superpower, super city.
Just 2 days ago, 42-year-old Phil Bachman and 27-year-old Anthony Christopherson worked together for Bank of America, high above Manhattan, in World Trade Center Tower 1.
In July, we moved up to the 81st floor, where helicopters would actually ride underneath us.
They both came to work early this past Tuesday, where it was business as usual.
It's early this Tuesday morning, the 11th of September, 2001.
But not for long.
8:50 or so, I heard a boom.
Together, Tom Kaminsky, Chopper 880.
All right, Pat, we are just currently getting a look at the World Trade Center. We have.
So when it hit, first thing you can do